Hello, it is Tuesday, the 14th of October, turnaround Tuesday in the markets. And because yesterday was a holiday, not for all markets, but the bond markets were closed, banks were closed, and a lot of people's children were on holiday yesterday. And so it was a quieter day than normal in the market. And that means that today could be the new Monday, which is usually a bit of a bullish bounce. We've had a nasty pullback overnight, and I wanted to look at Bitcoin. And my favorite kind of leading indicator for Bitcoin is Microstrategy. Kind of works like an anchor or an air balloon. You know, it's very hard for Bitcoin to rally when Microstrategy is not behaving and headed lower, and vice versa. So let's take a look at where we are with Bitcoin. I'm going to start on this weekly chart, and these weekly moving averages are what we are looking at. If I take all my scribbles off, you can see that in these rallies, the 20 and the 50 moving averages are really good indicators for support and resistance and trend. And we can see that since we made the bottom in April, two or three times we've pulled back to this weekly 20 moving average for support and continued higher. At the moment, this morning we're peaking. Last week, even with the really nasty shakeout on Friday, by Sunday we still managed to close back above this moving average, and here we are again taking a peek underneath it. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's bearish, but it does mean if we continue lower. For me, I've got two levels that I'm looking at. This previous swing low, which would make this kind of a big three-wave corrective move, and this 100,000 level. It's a big deal. It's the weekly 50 moving average, and it's the swing lows from the summer. It's where we kept finding support over the summer at 100,000. That's where I'm looking for next. Now, ever since we kind of bottomed back in 2022, this weekly 50 moving average has been really important support on pullback retests. So this pullback retest of 100,000 is really important. That's 10% lower than where we are now. And I'm not convinced we're going to go there this week. And the reason is options expiration, which has become a really big deal for Bitcoin now that you can trade it in so many kind of institutional ways like CME futures and the ETFs. And so this options expiration this Friday makes it more likely that we are staying within this trading range that we are in, be kind of between 125 and 110,000. And I think that this pullback today could give us a little bit of a bounce, at least to start the week. And I'll talk about why and where we are at. So if we go down to the daily, you can see that this was a pretty clear rejection, wasn't it, of our bunched up daily moving averages. Here we bounced from the 200 moving average, and very interestingly, if I take all of these moving averages off, this was an exact 50% retrace. So from this high to low, we got to the 50% level, which is 115,600, and we reversed. The thing about mean reverting markets is they tend to keep mean reverting. So if you pull back 50% one way, you tend to pull back 50% the other way. It's just kind of how it works. Which means if we put our 50 in it, and when you break out of that coiling up where you keep going 50%, and so on, that means that you're likely to see a bigger move or a retest to the lows. And here we can see a pretty clear previous low. There's quite a level around here. At the moment, we are looking underneath this 50% level. I'm very big on 4-hour closes. So if we close this next 4-hour candle, which you can see we've got a bit of time, underneath 110,800, that makes it more likely that we are like to do a deeper retest of the lows. And this might accelerate if that happens. And the reason is that these market makers, all the people who sell these billions in options that expire on Friday, hedge their positions, and they need to keep it in a pretty tight range to hedge. And if they break out of this range, then they become sellers just like us. So it kind of accelerates the move as you head towards options expiration. But because this is Tuesday and the broader market is likely to open, I would not be surprised at all if we see a bigger move from here. And quite often what you see is this will be the first swing, and then you'll see this, we might see something like this, and another swing. And the reason is, even if we're going to make a bigger three-wave correction here in Bitcoin, we need a middle leg, a bounce leg. Now, we could say, well, this has already done three waves and it could keep going lower, and that is true. Just watch out for it to accelerate if that happens. And if we keep going and we don't save the day at this 110,800 level, we are likely to continue lower, and the next target is going to be this 110 level. This 110 level is really interesting for all of the reasons that I have said, but if we put our moving averages on, I would expect a pretty good bounce from this level at 100,000 for a number of reasons. And I'm not going to say that we are in a bigger correction or that any kind of a top is in here unless we close and get stuck underneath that 100,000 level. But there is a risk. Again, 110,800, this on a 4-hour close, if we close underneath it, I think there is a risk that we continue lower to this 100,000 level. If you are looking at this, I don't like to sell the lows or stop out on the lows. I usually like to get out on a bounce if I can, but that's how I'm looking at Bitcoin on lower time frame levels, and I think we've got a little bit squeezed, and I would not be surprised to see if we bounce from this level. But we know where we're going if we don't. And let's talk about MicroStrategy. So for me, MicroStrategy is quite a good leading indicator. And if I look at the fib patterns and everything that we have done in this weekly, it's true that this weekly 50 moving average in MicroStrategy, we are underneath it and it has become resistance. And we have done one of those fib patterns. So if I put my fib retrace levels from the high to the low in MicroStrategy, we went through this 50% level and we did this 61.8, kind of 38.2 underneath it, 236 fib. For me, if we look at this on a daily, because this looks to me like 5 waves, I would expect a bigger 3-wave rally here, and I would expect it to go back to this 50% level here in the middle, which makes it 387. Now, in the pre-market, we're underneath it, and if we don't, and if we get stuck underneath 305, which is where we're going to open at the moment, just because of the moves that we are seeing in Bitcoin. Can't draw it. But 305 for me is the level that if we recover and hold above it, we had a semi-bullish reaction, then I would expect this to pan out as as a 3-wave rally from here, either back to 350, and second target would be 387, and only if we got stuck underneath 305 would I expect this to continue lower in MicroStrategy, and that would be a bearish leading indicator for Bitcoin and point to us continuing lower to that 100,000 level. Again, this feels like a shakeout ahead of the open. Regaining 10,800 in spot Bitcoin would point to another move higher. If we look at it in the futures, we are back retesting the kind of lows of this sideways range. We kind of missed out on this nasty move in the futures because a lot of it, although it started, it's kind of gradual all day. I say this quite often, flash crashes never come from a high or a new all-time high. They come from a low. They come from a market that has been selling and selling, and then people buy the dip, and then the stops of those people are the rocket fuel that give you that final flush or that final flash crash or liquidation event. And that's certainly what we saw on Friday in Bitcoin and a lot of crypto. Key support for me, if this is a big A, B, C, key support here is 109,145 in Bitcoin CME futures. But if we extend it or we do one of those flushes, then The key trend support, Fibonacci 200 moving average, weekly 50, could be a little bit lower at 104,600 in the futures. So I would expect a pretty sharp back if we're going to, this potentially is a big sideways range, and we are about to, having kind of triple topped here in Bitcoin CME futures, I would expect these lows to hold. So we've got a little bit further to fall, not much in these markets. So that's how I'm looking at Bitcoin and MicroStrategy. As you know, they're quite a good leading indicator for all of the other crypto, and we see where we go from here. But today is one of those good days to keep on top of what's going on, because it is quite a good leading indicator, and we haven't quite got this flush here. And just because of the options expiration, I would expect them to try and keep us in this range, if you like. But if it doesn't work, then it could get a little bit spiky. Good luck.